first I'm going to just do an overview of what a fraction is. We're going to go through addition and subtraction, then multiplication and division, okay? And then give you some time to actually practice too, like we did yesterday. So and again, this may be very elementary, but I just want to start at the beginning, and then we'll work our way to harder problems. But a fraction is a ratio. And what I mean by that, a ratio, this is a ratio. This says 3 to 4, or 3 over 4, or 3/4, as we start looking at the fraction side of it. The number on top is it's called what? Numerator. Numerator. Number on top is the numerator. The number on bottom, denominator. Numerator and denominator. Okay, so when we add or subtract fractions, the two fractions have to have the same what? Denominator. Okay, so your life is really easy when you get a problem like this. Yay. Right? Because the denominator is the same. And so when I do problems like this, I just write a fraction line, because I know that's going to be a fraction in the end that I'm going to be analyzing. And I can see the denominator is the same, so I can just write that denominator. And then all I have to do is just add the numerators across. Okay, 1 plus 3 is 4. And then I have to simplify. I can't just leave a fraction unsimplified. So what is 4 over 2?
2.
2, good. So it's 2. I could even write it this way, but I could write it this way and it's all the same. 2 over 1 is also 2. Okay, so every whole number that you know, 3, 4, 5, 7, 11, 1,000, can be written as a fraction by just putting the denominator equal to 1. Okay? So every number is really a fraction, but most numbers that are integers or whole numbers just have the denominator of 1, so you don't have to write that denominator, you can just write the whole number. Everybody with me so far? Okay, where things get a little more tricky, let's do this one. I know I want to start a different way. Is this. Denominators are not the same. Okay? So what we have to do is find a common denominator. And what that means is we've got to find the least common multiple, or LCM. You'll see that abbreviated sometimes in math. LCM, the least common multiple of both of these numbers. And what I mean by that is when I take 2 times 1 is 2, right?
Yes.
2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. Okay? I can do 3 the same way. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. Oh, I just found the least common multiple of both of those. It's 6. So they both go into 6 evenly. That's the least common multiple. That's now my common denominator. Okay? A lot of times, maybe when you learned fractions the first time, you were taught to find the common denominator, you just need to multiply the denominators. And in this case, it worked. Right? This case, 3 times 2 is 6, and that ended up being the least common multiple. So I can use 6 as my denominator. Okay? Once I've identified what the denominator is, that's your first step. When you have unlike denominators, you want to figure out what the least common multiple is and what the common denominator is before you take the next step. So our least common multiple is 6. So what I need to do here is get this to 6. What do I have to multiply 2 by to get to 6? 3. So I'm just going to put a dot here. Remember, that means multiplication. Now, with any number, if I multiply any number by 1, what's left? A number multiplied by 1. Thank you.
For you guys for helping in everything you do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What's 3 times 1? What's 4 times 1? 100 times 1. What kind of pattern do you see here? A number multiplied by 1 is what? Itself. This is the multiplicative identity. That's the long way of saying that. When I multiply a number by itself, identity, I just get that number. Okay? So this comes in really handy with fractions. Because how do I represent 1, with a denominator of 3? What needs to go in the numerator? How do I get 1 out of this? What number divided by 3 is 1? 3 itself, right? 3 over 3 is 1. So if I multiply 1/2 times 1, have I changed its value? No. This is important when you're dealing with fractions, because if I'm going to multiply the denominator by 3 to get that common denominator here, I have to multiply the numerator by 3 so it's still equal to 1/2. Because if I multiply any number by 1, I'm left with that number. With me still? Okay? And let's just test it. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. So I get 3 over 6. If I simplify that, what is the fraction? 1/2. So I've just created the exact same number I started with. I haven't changed the value at all, which I don't want to do. I mean, I can't make this 2/3 because that's not what I started with. Okay? So what I do to get the common denominator is I multiply it by 3 here and by 3 here. Essentially multiplying it by 1, which didn't change the value. Okay? And then over here I do the same thing. I want to get this to 6, so I've got to multiply the denominator by 2, but I also have to do that to the top, because I also want to multiply the right side by 1, so I don't change its value. Okay? So what I end up with is 3 over 6 plus 4 over 6, because 2 times 2 is 4 over 6. And now I have the same denominator. So now I'm back to a problem like the first one we did. Okay? 3 plus 4 is 7. And then I don't add these, right? That's the denominator is 6. So the answer to that problem is 7/6. Can I simplify that at all?
Yes.
No. I can't. 7/6, I could. It would be a decimal. I can't simplify it to a whole number like I could up here when I got 4/2. It simplified to 2 over 1, which is 2. But I can't really simplify it. So this is the final answer. When you guys get to high school and we start practicing for the ACT, there's a guy named John Baylor that does the ACT prep, and we play videos, and John Baylor prep. He got a perfect ACT score, and he went to Harvard, and he lives in Lincoln or Omaha, and he puts on this prep program that our school subscribes to, and so you get to hear his tricks to math and science and shortcuts and ways to remember things. And he calls this method with fractions the crisscross method. So I'm going to show you that just to see if it helps. First thing you do is you multiply these together. Then you multiply crisscross. Three times 1 is 3. 2 times 2 is 4. And then you just get 7/6. Okay? It works. This method works when your common denominator is a different number than what's already there. 6, right? We don't have 6 there. Okay? But if up here, if this makes more sense to start with, and you just want to take your time, which you all should, don't rush through these until they really come easy. The more you do it, the faster you get at it. I mean, I can do fractions really well now, but when I started, it took me time. And you need to take the time so you really get it. Okay, so starting this way would help, but this might be a way to check it. You know? Okay, so we have other times, though, when we don't have the same denominator. We need to find the least common multiple. Well, is the least common multiple here 8?
No.
What is the least common multiple? It's 4, okay? And I can show that if I just start with the same process and just go this way and so on and just figure out what these are. I found it. Right? The least common multiple for both of these is 4. So you could use the crisscross method all the time. I'm going to do this both ways. I'm going to do it using me taking the effort to find the least common multiple for the common denominator, and then I'm going to do it the crisscross method the way John Baylor teaches and show you'll get the same answer. And then it's up to you to decide which way you like. Okay? So if I do this method where I'm finding the least common multiple and using the common denominator is 4. So I'm just going to write that on the bottom because I know that's a fact. And that way I kind of keep organized and I'm not getting confused as I go through the process. Now, 2 times what is 4? 2. 2. So I'm going to multiply the denominator by 2 because I want to get that to 4. But I can't just do it to the denominator. I have to do it to the numerator. Otherwise, I'm changing the value of 1/2. I want to multiply 1/2 by 1. To do that, I've got to multiply top and bottom by 2, not just the bottom. Okay? 2 times 1 is 2, and then 2 times 2 is 4. So I end up with 2/4 plus 3/4. 2 plus 3, 5/4. And I can't simplify that to a whole number. So that's my final answer. With me still? Okay. So let's try it the crisscross method. Okay. 2/3, I'm going to do it on a clean 1/2 plus 2/3. Crisscross, nope, 2/4. Nope, 3/4. There we go. This is our clean slate here. 1/2 plus 3/4. Crisscross method says, multiply your denominator. With me? Now I just cross 4 plus 6.
10.
Okay? 10/8. Can I simplify that?
Yes.
2.
I think the crisscross one is easier.
Well, what happens with the crisscross, if you have a denominator that could have been used as the denominator, like 4 in that last example, you use the crisscross method, you're going to have one simplification at the end. One way, because we had 10/8, we had to do one more step. If you can recognize the common denominator was 4, you won't have that at the end, but then you've got to remember to multiply both sides by that 2/2 or 3/3 or whatever. Okay, either way will get you the same answer. The crisscross method is kind of easy to remember, but you just have to do that last step of simplifying at the end. The least common multiple is, for some of us, is easy too. With me? So far? Hopefully this has been a refresher, but is it sort of clicking a little more or remembering a little more from what you did? Okay, so let's talk about subtraction. Same kind of deal. You have to have the same denominator. When they give you a problem like this, you're doing the happy dance because you don't have to do much work, right? The denominator is given to you, it's 4. And then I just take 3 minus 1, and then I have to simplify if I can. Everybody understand how to simplify fractions?
Yep.
Or do I need to review? I can review that. And don't be afraid to raise your hand if you'd like me to review simplifying fractions. Going once? Okay. All right. So when I have the same denominator, it's a piece of cake. When I have different denominators, make it a fun one. That's the same process. Common denominator here is what? Do I need to write? Yeah, so you start, when you first learn fractions, you start writing those multiplications down until you find the one that's common. And then the more you do it, the more you can just start seeing it. Is everybody kind of to the point where I could take 3 times 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7, 7 times 3, 21. There's no number smaller than 21 that both of these numbers go in evenly. Therefore, 21 is the least common multiple. Okay? Least meaning the smallest multiple of both numbers. That's kind of what LCM means. So if you're ever on a test, NISA or NWEA or whatever, and you see LCM, that stands for least common multiple, and all it means is the smallest number that both numbers go into evenly. Okay? In this case, the LCM, or the least common multiple, is 21. Okay? So I've recognized 21. To get to 21 here, I've got to multiply by 7. Can't just do it to the bottom. To get to 21 here, I've got to multiply by 3. Can't just do it to the bottom. Now I can see 7 times 2 is 14. 5 times 3 is 15 over 21. 14 minus 15, positive or negative number? Negative. Negative. So this is kind of a review from yesterday, right? Because if I start at 14 and I subtract 15, I end up at negative 1. Yep. So this is negative 1 over 21. Can't really simplify it. Let's see if the crisscross method works here. 2/3 minus 5/7. Crisscross says multiply these, cross them. You always have to do this one first.
Still works.
Still works. The order matters, though, in subtraction. If I did 15 minus 14, I'd get positive 1 over 21, which is not correct. So I always have to multiply the one on the left. Think about it reading left to right. The top left has to be the first number that you write when you use the crisscross for subtraction. Okay, we're good on addition, subtraction of fractions. Okay, multiplication and division of fractions is easier than this, right? Because you don't need a common denominator. Let's do multiplication. That means times. So all I have to do here, multiply the numerators across and multiply the denominators across, and then simplify if I can. I can't on this one. That's it. No finding common denominators with multiplication. It's only addition, subtraction. Okay? I like division because we get to do fun things with division. Same problem, but I'm just going to do divide. Every time I see a fraction, yes?
So in multiplication, you just multiply straight across.
Yep. That's it. I know, piece of cake. Just straight across. You don't have to worry about denominators being the same. Numerators across, denominators across. Simplify the fraction if you can. Piece of cake.
Oh, well.
Okay? Division of fractions. When I divide by a fraction, and this I want this to be a mantra. When I divide by a fraction, I multiply by its reciprocal. So let's back up. What's a reciprocal mean?
It flipped around.
Every time you hear the word reciprocal, think flip. Okay? What's the reciprocal of 3? 3 over 1 is 3. What's the reciprocal? 1 over 3, yeah. So when you want to find the reciprocal of a whole number, remember, every whole number can be written as a fraction. And once I write it as a fraction and I want to flip it, the reciprocal of 3 over 1 is 1 over 3. So let's go back to the mantra I want to get in your head, because I want you to know this all the way through high school, because you're going to get a lot of more complicated expressions that have fractions in them in denominators. And I want you just to always remember, to divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal. And we know how to multiply fractions, so if we can get it into a multiplication problem, it makes it so much easier. Okay? So to divide by a fraction, I'm dividing by 1/4. I multiply by the reciprocal. That's the rule for division. If you are dividing by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal. And the reciprocal is just the flip of what it used to be. Okay, and now this becomes very easy. 3 times 4, 12. 2 times 1, 2. I have to reduce if I can. And I can just write it without a fraction because it's a whole number. Want to try another division problem? Maybe. There we go. So, what do I write first?
Reciprocal.
Which one do I need to take the reciprocal of?
The second
5,
one.
7.
The second one. So the first thing I'm going to write is the first number as it is, multiplied by
7/5.
7 times 3, 21. 5 times 5, 25. Is there a number that goes into both of those evenly?
No.
No. So that's as simplified as it gets. Okay, so I didn't pass these back out, so I'm going to put this on the board. We're going to combine yesterday and today and do problem 1 that I gave you the other day. And I'll pass the boards out. I'll find somewhat clean ones here. Figure out where all my pens went. There's extras.
So for the problem for geometry, it's on today.
Rob.
Negative 1/2 plus negative 3/5.